Commercial saving a property. Whoops, let's start over.
You're good.
Okay, so I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. Let me know if you can, but you should be seeing something that says KW Commercial, July 23rd, saving a property transaction with recognized environmental conditions. So I'm an environmental engineer by background, but I'm no longer a practicing engineer, although I have my professional engineering cert. I now actually buy properties that have environmental problems. Old gas stations, old dry cleaners, warehouses that had toxic chemicals that have spilled into the soil and groundwater. And I look for them voluntarily. That's 90% of what I buy. And what I see among my brokerage friends is that they'll get involved with an acquisition of a commercial property. They'll do a phase one, and the phase one says you have recognized environmental conditions, and then maybe they'll do a phase two, and they'll see some contaminated soil and or groundwater, and that many times can kill a deal. So I'm here to tell you, you don't have to kill the deal. There's ways to save it, and we're going to talk about that in about 15 minutes. You use the right slide changer here. Oops. There we go. So we're going to talk about areas I target, a little bit about environmental remediation, how I price to account for the fact that there's environmental problems, a couple sample projects, and then some time for questions. So a little trivia for you. There's about 200,000 sites in the state that still need to be contaminated. And many times you can find these sites on one of these two websites. It's GeoTracker or EnviroStore. You put in the site address and there's an active agency file, they should be on there. But there's a lot of sites that don't have active agency files. I look at about 200 or 250 sites a year and close about 3 or 4. So there's a lot of chaff you got to get through to get to the wheat. Moving on. So we buy sites that are in infill areas such as anywhere along this 110 freeway looking at downtown LA. What we don't do is buy sites that are in the boondocks that are not in infill areas. So we focus on infill areas, high property values, and that everyone wants to buy, but for the contamination. We buy gas stations, dry cleaners, and on the lower photo is just pictorial of some industrial parks, which we like taking part in. So having said that, I know better than to try to compete with the Majestics, Rexfords, and large developers in general. So our sweet spot is 2 million to 15 million clean value, which is actually encompasses quite a bit. Now, Kim, can you see my cursor when I move my arrow on the screen?
No, I'm not seeing that.
Okay, then that's all right. I'll just talk in general. I'm going to segue into a discussion of contaminants. So what this is a plan view, bird's eye view of a plume map. And that red square is a former gas station I bought in Hollywood off of Sunset and Westwood. Fernwood, as you see here, is about 2 blocks south of Sunset. So it's a very high traffic area. And those dots you see on the screens are actually wells, groundwater wells, where we sample to see what kind of gasoline contaminants are there. And those squiggly oval type lines show how far the contaminants have gone. And these contaminants in the groundwater actually went to a good 500 feet. So when we encounter these sites, we have to ask ourselves, have the contaminants been defined vertically and laterally? And does a remediation system need to come in? Well, this is an example of a remediation system. It's called soil vapor extraction. What will happen is we'll put in an air vent well, we'll put in an air sparging well, and we'll actually inject air, and some of the chemicals will come up with the bubbles, and then we'll, through an SVE well, soil vapor extraction well, also see in the middle, take those vapors and scrub them. Now, soil vapor extraction is probably the most common type of remediation technology, but there's other ways to extract, treat, and safely dispose of the residual. And so thermal desorption, excavation, pump and treat, solidification, stabilization, bioremediation, these are all terms you may have heard out there. And basically, they're fancy ways of saying the contaminants have to be extracted, they need to be treated, and they need to be safely disposed. So here's something that all my broker friends appreciate, like how much are you going to deduct the price by? And this is only a qualitative table, but the lesson from this table is the more contaminants you have, and if both soil and groundwater have been impacted, the greater the reduction is going to be. So if you have a site that's worth 5 million clean, and you've got looking at going 5 million down, 3 soil with hydrocarbon and fluorinated solvents, I'm probably going to need to take a good 25% off the purchase price. If I have that same site going down to the bottom, groundwater with hydrocarbons and fluorinated solvents, I'm probably going to have to take 40, 50%. If you look to the left, though, a $1 million site that has groundwater that's contaminated with chlorinated solvents, I can't even look at that. It's just going to be more expensive than the clean value of the site. So sometimes things are upside down. So I've got a quick question for the group. I'll interject for a moment here. Let me ask you this. If I have a clean value of the site worth 5 million, and the environmental cost to remediate is 2 million, should I offer 3 million for the site? Or should I expect 3 million for the site? Anybody want to comment? So,
Well,
go
what
ahead.
about, did you say again, if you have a clean
Sure.
site of 5 million?
And there's 2 million of expected remediation costs. Should I offer 3 million? Just the difference for the site.
Depends on the contamination, how
Well,
extensive?
Well, we're saying that the contamination has been defined, and everyone
As 2
agrees it's going to
million.
cost 2 million to clean up. I'll spare you the grief. The answer is no. We have to get more than just the difference between remediation costs and the clean value, because we're taking more risk.
Mm.
So if we were offering 3 million when it had a $2 million liability, we wouldn't be taking into consideration that we can't get debt, that there's going to be sort of a stigma associated with the site, and the fact that we want a greater return than just the 6 cap. So, that's my takeaway from that slide. One other thing we do is we try to tap into State Water Resources Control Board. They have underground storage tank cleanup funds. We see the deep pockets here. We'll sometimes sue people that have been there to try to get them to participate. We'll sometimes find old insurance policies. That's why I put AIG there, that will provide some coverage for old releases. But those are very, very hard to deal with. In fact, I bought a site where we had the underground storage tank fund, and we were out of pocket 1.2 million for 3 years before we got reimbursed from the state grant funds.
Matt,
And
one
so,
quick question.
Please.
Would you offer the 2.5 instead of 5, or you didn't mention how much would you offer on that hypothetical?
And that
I was
I'm
gonna
going to
go
go to
with 2.5.
Leilani and say it depends. How confident are we in that remediation cost estimate? How good is the property? How long is it going to take the property? Because I haven't really talked about time.
Opportunity costs.
Yeah, opportunity costs and the like.
Well,
We
this is
probably
a risky business. I mean, you got to take some sort of.
Yeah, I'd probably offer 1 million for that kind of thing. So, but
Oh.
here's a direct answer to your question, Albert. So we put together syndications. There are investor requirements. So when you look at a 5-year project, these can be 5-year, they can be 1 year, they can be 10-year. You put something in a T-bill, you're getting 4.5%, give or take. The Dow, I don't know, it's much better than 5.5% annualized these days, and so is the NASDAQ. But even though these numbers are a little old, I think I put together the slide 6 months ago. The point is, contaminated real estate needs to have a cap rate of at least 20%. So it's high risk, it's high return, and
Wow.
we've never done less than 20 cap.
I'm learning. Thank you.
Sure.
Matt, can I ask you a question? I think
Of course.
you mentioned on maybe it was slides 6 or 7 about that, the process, the cleanup process, like what's the time frame on that? Yes,
This kind of vapor extraction treatment process is probably in the field extracting vapors for a year, but you're a half a year designing it and getting it permitted. And then you do something called, oh my gosh, you have to let the system stop and then sample 6 months to make sure that there's no recurrence of contaminants after you've done the system. So vapor extraction is give or take 2 years, but that's if it works. So if it doesn't work, then you've got to bring in another, maybe a more powerful system.
so you're talking about a couple years at
Yes, if you start talking about vapor extraction systems or similar systems, yeah, you're talking a couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So let's go to an example. So I bought in Garden Grove a half-acre warehouse, and it was a clearinghouse for dry cleaners that didn't have. It was an industrial dry cleaner and launder. So they had already spent $600,000 on the environmental. I estimated it was going to be another 1.7 million, and the site value was 2 million. The 600,000 was a sunk cost. It really didn't matter to me too much, but $1.7 million cleanup for a $2 million site, even for $1, who would take that risk? And contamination was flowing towards beneath the high school. I mean, how much would you pay? Probably not much. But what we did find during due diligence is some old insurance policies that covered the remediation. But we had to take the risk that we could get the insurance company to come forward. So we paid $100,000 for the site. We took the risk. We paid another $50,000 in legal fees. And the site is now being cleaned up by AIG's consultant, which is a phenomenal consultant, Geosyntec. And it's operating at a triple net of about 132,000 per year. Now, having said that, we may only pay 100,000 for the price, but we'll work something out with the broker to pay them at or near based on the clean value of the site. We want commissions. We want the brokers to get commissions in line with the clean values for the site, or else you'd have very little incentive.
So Matt, did the insurance pay for the cleanup?
Correct.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for asking, Albert. And if you want to read about this, it's on my website. New York Times actually did a profile of the site and just winefieldinc.com, and you can get some details. Another site, that service station I talked about earlier, this is how it looks like in pictorial form. I was actually driving with some friends for a late night dinner, and I saw this site, and I saw the broker's name, and I knew him, and I called him the next day, and he said that they had spent 1.5 million already, and there had been 15 years of remediation. But we tapped into another cleanup fund that got us another $1 million in grants. And that's very important to understand your grant programs. So we knew the grant funds were available. We thought it was going to be about another 800,000 cleanup. It was actually 1.2. So we were out of pocket about 400,000, but we still did quite well. We paid $1 million. We got 250,000 cash and 750,000 seller carryback. So this is the rendering of how the site's going to look to the developer we sold it to. We don't develop. We sell the developers. So we sold for 3.8 million, and the rate of return was about 40% for a 4-year project. But at one point, we were very concerned because we had so much money outstanding for the environmental. We were waiting on the grant funds from the state. So again, as you've alluded, risky business. 2016 was a good year for newspaper articles. We're on the cover of the LA Business Journal. If you want to go to winefieldinc.com, you can read more about the site. We also buy notes. I just put this here because some of you may have heard of West Coast Choppers, and Jesse James is a former shop in North Long Beach, but a colleague of mine bought the note and it had significant contamination. We usually buy fee simple, but sometimes we buy notes. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I didn't want to take up a bunch of time, so I'm here for you. How can I help?
Yeah, Matt, I have a couple questions. So you have environmental expertise that obviously you can apply to analyzing the sites. a typical investor doesn't possess your expertise. So
Mhm.
they'd have to hire an engineering firm
Correct.
to work for them.
Yes.
What would you estimate that level of effort would cost an investor in order to determine whether the site potentially could produce a windfall profit down the road or be worthy of pursuit?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. If there's already a phase 1 and a phase 2 there, then you can take that data to reputable consultants, say, what's the order of magnitude remediation cost and what's going to take? And that is probably, for a good firm that's using existing data, a $3,000 to $5,000 exercise that'll take them a
Mhm.
couple of weeks to do.
Mhm.
But many times they want more data, or they say there's not enough data.
Mhm.
So you say, all right, just take the data you have there and put in a factor of safety. What's it going to take us?
Mhm. Are you open to consulting in that type of
I,
venture?
I'm not a consultant, but I'm happy to direct you to good consultants who do that. Please just drop me a note. I don't want to infringe on consultants' work. I used to be a consultant. I used to own a consulting firm called Alta Environmental, and they since got sold out. But if you as a broker have some general questions and you want to spitball some ideas, I'm happy to get involved.
Okay.
So free consulting, how's that?
How about partnerships? Are you open to partnerships?
Yes, absolutely. So
Okay.
my business model is, I'm just sharing my contact info so you can contact me if you like. My business model is definitely buying sites or JVing. So if someone's selling a site and they're worried about that it's contaminated, I'm happy to take a look and sign a non-disclosure and see if we can do something together. If someone is selling and they just want to get rid of it because they don't want the liability, we'll provide indemnification agreements and buy them. And then if you as a broker want to invest, let's talk.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, quick question. Do you accept phase 1 and phase 2 from like a seller, or you guys do your own from the beginning? I'm just wondering how that
Yeah,
works.
we will definitely, in fact, we prefer that there's some data available. So we like to look at it. We'll probably end up getting our own data, but we've bought sites based on others, and a lot of that depends on the consultant that did the work. And then Elizabeth Bull, is that, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly.
Close enough.
Thank you. As asking what areas do we cover? We're mostly Southern California, but we've done work all over California, and also we've done Seattle. We've had some outliers in the Midwest and East Coast, but we love LA and Orange County, but we'll look at other places as well. We bought a site in San Jose about 3 years ago. Mostly California-based company though.
Hmm.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay.
Well, I hope I
Well,
made it interesting.
Yeah,
Matt,
well,
will
I
you be,
mean, can you add more? Talk about more stuff?
What would you like to know? How can I,
Well, I mean, some of the programs that are available with grants what?
okay, let
One
me
other
tell you,
question. Yeah, I'm sorry. One
what
other
about,
question.
go ahead.
So gas stations,
Yes,
if they were there for decades ago,
yes,
I know that the gas company, the Shells and the Chevrons, weren't indemnifying the property owners. But my understanding was in the recent past, maybe 1990s on, that these oil companies would indemnify the property owners and provide the deep pockets needed to clean up sites.
great question. Great question. That is correct. It all depends on the lease agreement that was in place. They varied significantly. I used to work for Chevron. And let me give you an example. I bought a gas station site in City of Industry, and I bought it from the city because they own the land, and they were using it as some sort of training for I forget, the sheriff or something. But it used to be a Chevron and it used to be an Arco. But they had to get rid of the site because of it was a redevelopment agency site, and they were required to get rid of redevelopment agency properties. So we bought it for $10,000 because it was contaminated. And during due diligence, I called Chevron. I said, I'm looking at the GeoTracker file and it says it's your liability. Why aren't you cleaning this up? I said, we'd be happy to clean it up as long as if the city would just give us access. We've asked them 3 or 4 times for access. I said, well, I closed this escrow November 30th, December 1, you can get access. And they had an agreement as the operator to clean up the site. And they and ARCO had already been through a dispute as to who was responsible, and the water board determined Chevron was. So Chevron cleaned it up, and we sold it to a gas station developer for $2.8 million because Chevron was cleaning up, and they felt Chevron's certification was good enough, even though they didn't get the no further action letter. So sometimes you just have to look at the lease agreements.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you see in your searches for properties that many of the lease agreements written, say, from 1990 onward?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I was just curious if you had
I don't recall.
exposure to.
I
Okay.
don't recall. So if we were buying a site and it used to be a gas station, we would definitely determine during due diligence if a major oil company had liability there.
Mm-hmm.
That's number 1 or 2 on our list. Elizabeth has asked, where's the contaminated soil taken for disposal? Do you employ, hire another company, transport the contaminated soil? Is that an extra cost in addition to your fees? So there are disposal sites, landfills in and out of the state. I forget the names, but what we do is we hire folks who will broker that deal. Basically soil brokers who will find based on the lab data and the costs, what's the best place to take it to. If it's hazardous waste, it needs to be manifested. If it's non-hazardous waste, then it can be done on just a bill of lading and taken to a municipal landfill. And yeah, I forget, I'm thinking taxes are probably like, for contaminated soil, like $20 a ton, and it's not cheap. And so you ask, is that an extra cost in addition to my fees? I just buy the sites, so if I assume that part of the remediation strategy is going to be excavation, then yes, that'll be part of the remediation cost and the remediation cost reduction from the purchase price. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask you a quick question? You mentioned that on one of these properties, you were able to go back and find an old insurance policy.
Yes, sir.
And resort to that. Now, that was on the premise that the contamination happened during the period that they covered. Their policy was in effect. Is that the idea behind that?
Sort of. There's actually been some case law that said if it was cover them during or after their release, then insurance has a requirement to defend. So let's say the policy's covered from 1979 to 1985, but the contaminants were there from 1970 onward, then insurance would have to cover. It's very hard to do.
How would you come up with at least some kind of an estimated idea of when the contamination happened? Can you do tests?
You can do tests to fingerprint it, and you can also look at things like, was there a big sudden accidental release, like a big plant fire or something? Okay. We've had instances where we find a newspaper article of a big tank fire, and that happened prior to the insurance covered period. but you can imagine how difficult that is to find.
One more quick question. You mentioned a really good point of the stigma that goes along even after the site is cleaned up.
Yes.
In your experience, even after the site is cleaned up, have you had to sell under market value because of that?
Slightly, yes, but only like 5%. And sometimes you can get around that by buying an insurance policy that says, all right, you have the no further action letter. If in the next 10 years, there's more agency actions, we, the insurance company, will cover. So that's about $100,000 policy, so it's not cheap. So if it's a $2 million sale, then that's a $5 million discount, basically, if the seller's paying for it.
Interesting.
So those are
Thank
called
you.
PLL, sure, pollution legal liability policies.
PLO policy.
PLL. Pollution.
PLL.
Yeah, not Palestine Liberation Organization.
Okay.
Not PLO.
Well, I didn't think of that. I thought the poker game PLO, but
That was a
okay.
bad joke, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you so much. This was a great, by the way, really very informative part of this business, one that nobody dares to touch. And I have a friend of mine who's an investor, and this is his bread and butter. He's
I'd be
made
happy to
so
team with
much
him.
money.
Let's all
I'm
get
sorry?
together. Let's all get together and do a transaction.
I will definitely. He bought a piece of property on the west side of LA West Side that nobody would touch, an old dry cleaners. And he didn't even go to somebody to clean it. He purchased the necessary equipment and he did it himself over like a year or year and a half. Got it cleaned up and the value, just like you said, extraordinary return on his investment.
Did he have agency participation, or did he just do it himself and get good data?
I'm not sure. I will ask him. I play poker with him every Wednesday.
I
so
wouldn't
I'll
want to
ask
play
him.
poker against that guy. I'm sure he's good.
He's not a very good player.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Awesome.
Does anyone else have any stories of?
Yeah, let's hear some more stories.
Yeah, I know, actually, I see Eric is on the call. Oh, and Omid, I know they currently have a gas station in Santa Maria that they're listing. But
Well, gas stations themselves, if they're relatively new, they might be lower risk, you know. So I see a question came up here, but I just want to finish on gas stations. If the gas stations were built relatively recently and they've got the double lining and tanks and leak detection devices, they're relatively low risk. It's the older ones that didn't have that a problem. Elizabeth asked, how are the phase 1, 2, or 3 affected by current California policies? Well, there's something called the Soil Vapor Intrusion Guideline from DTSC and the Water Board that have made cleanup standards for anything but gas stations, anything that had PCE, TCE, and warehouses or dry cleaners, and they've made the standards about 95% tougher in the last 2 years. So the cost of remediation is going up significantly, especially for non-gas station sites. So there have been some very recent changes. February 23, I wonder if that's what you're referring to, Elizabeth, but in the past 3 years, they've ratcheted down the cleanup standards for PCE and TCE considerably, and they're now officially the strictest in the nation.
California is the strictest in the
Yes,
nation?
yes, for cleaning up soil vapor. So it used to be you could clean up a dry cleaner for 800,000 or 900,000. Now it's probably 1.5, 1.6 million.
Wow. And Elizabeth said, does that apply to drilling sites that the land can be converted to other uses?
Drilling sites, if it's got benzene, yeah, that definitely impacts that. So by drilling sites, I think you mean oil production, crude and stuff? Yeah, yeah. Crude has benzene, and it's definitely impacted by these vapor intrusion guidelines.
Okay. All right. Matt, will I be able to get your presentation slides to share with the group?
Yes, I sent them to you. Do you
Oh,
want me to
that's right.
resend?
No, actually, yeah, I remember. I have them.
Okay, I sent them in PowerPoint. Is that okay?
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah,
Yep.
please
Thank you.
share with the group. I'd be heartbroken if you didn't.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think this was really valuable information. I appreciate you
Appreciate-
being here.
Appreciate the great questions, and good luck with your deals out there. And let's pray for low interest rates, huh?
That would be nice.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Before we get off, does anybody have any listings or buyer needs they wanted to shout out? Nope. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks again, Matt, and
Thank
we'll see you
you.
in 2 weeks.
Take
Bye.
care.